I, 26 male, and my girlfriend, 27 female, met each other in college when we were in the same calculus class. She was smart, and I used that as an excuse to ask her for help with some of the work. I was an engineering major and understood math much better than she did. We flirted a lot and eventually started going out. We were together all 4 years of undergrad, and we lived together while we both attended separate grad schools in the city. I couldn't imagine a life without her. I had been with her for so long and saw so much of my future with her in it. I wanted to propose, but I wanted to do it when both of us were stable in our careers and truly ready for that step. Her family lived in Texas, and we lived in New York, so she didn't get to see them often. I met them a few times but didn't know them very well. She had a great relationship with them all, and they talked often. I knew that she missed them more than anything, but she was happy living in the city. One evening, out of the blue, we got a phone call from her mother. Her sister was in a car accident and was in the ICU. She immediately packed a bag and bought the next plane ticket she could to go see her. I wanted to go with her, but we decided it would be best for me to stay behind for a day to let her work know and schedule someone to care for our dog. I did just that while she went ahead of me. While she was on the plane ride home, her mother called me and told me her sister passed away. I was heartbroken that I couldn't be there with her when she got the news. Her sister was one of her best friends. They were called twins because they were so similar. My girlfriend was 2 years younger than her, but they looked identical and they sounded exactly the same. When she landed in Texas, her trip switched from visiting her injured sister to helping plan a funeral. I stayed behind longer than I expected at her suggestion. She didn't want me to leave work until they had a date planned for the funeral. We couldn't afford to spend a lot on dog boarding or a dog sitter, so the shorter my time in Texas, the better. I called her often to check in on her while she was away. As the time went on, it sounded like she was getting better. There were some times when she didn't answer, so I texted to check in on her. She would call me back later those nights and tell me that she had been at her sister's house going through some of her things. Her sister was married to a guy we'll call Joe. He was nice the few times I met him, but he seemed superficial to me. He wanted a big house, nice cars, and a hot wife. So that's exactly what he got in life. I always thought he wanted to marry my wife's sister because she would be the perfect trophy wife. I knew that spending time at her sister's house would mean spending time with him, but she was mourning. It never crossed my mind that they would start sleeping together. Eventually, I flew down for the funeral and finally got to be with my girlfriend again. I missed her and I felt terrible that I wasn't able to be with her while she was grieving. During the wake, Joe struck up a conversation with me and mentioned how sometimes he'd look at my girlfriend and see her sister. Then his eyes lingered on her much longer than I felt comfortable. I didn't say anything because he just lost his wife and everything. Afterwards, he kept mentioning how hard it was on my girlfriend and how I wasn't there. It seemed like he was trying to guilt trip me. My girlfriend and I flew back to the city a couple of days after the funeral and started trying to get things back to normal. My girlfriend was still grieving and a lot of things upset her. I just tried to be there for her. The only problem was that she wouldn't let me help her. Whenever I tried to comfort her, she would turn it down. When I tried to hold her at night, she turned away from me. She didn't even want to hold my hand. I thought all of that was her grieving and shutting me out for it. One day, I came home from work and found her in our bedroom trying on some clothes she brought back from Texas. They were all her sister's things, stuff that Joe bought for her before she died. I noticed that she was taking a lot of pictures in the clothes too. A few weeks later, she told me that Joe was coming to visit and would be crashing with us. He needed to get out of their house, and he had never been to New York, so she invited him. I felt bad being upset about it, but I was. I was still annoyed with how he was looking at her during his wife's wake, and on top of that, nobody asked me if it was okay. Still, I didn't say anything because it was such a sensitive issue. My girlfriend was talking to him a lot leading up to his arrival. I would come home from work and see them FaceTime each other, talking about different places they were going to go when he was there. He called all the time, and they texted a lot too. They hadn't been that way before the funeral. It was rubbing me the wrong way, but I didn't know what to say to address it. I was aware that no matter what I said, I was going to come across like a jerk because both of them were still mourning. Joe eventually arrived in the city and my girlfriend, and I helped him get settled in our apartment. My girlfriend worked from home, and I worked a few blocks away, so she was going to be alone with him most of the time he was there. My gut was telling me not to trust it. I hadn't seen anything that directly told me there was something going on with them. I just had a feeling that their relationship had changed immensely since the funeral, and it was gnawing at me. I let my imagination run wild, thinking of all the conversations they had over text messages or while I wasn't there. My girlfriend looked exactly like her sister. There was no doubt in my mind that Joe would be attracted to her. He probably had always been. One afternoon while I was working, I sent my girlfriend a text message asking her if she wanted me to grab food on my way home. Normally, she would respond to my messages within half an hour. Even if she was in a meeting, she would still be on her phone and texting. That time, however, she didn't respond at all. I was a little bit worried, so I left work a couple of hours early to go home and make sure everything was all right. Before I put the key in the door, I heard some very alarming noises on the other end. It was clear that someone was having sex in the apartment. As quietly as I could, I put my key in the door and opened it to find my girlfriend wearing one of her sister's dresses and having sex on the couch with Joe. They saw me, and she immediately jumped off of him, quickly putting herself back together to follow me down the hallway. I was done with her as soon as I saw it. I had my suspicions, and they were confirmed for me. Before I could get on the elevator, she slid through the door and started trying to explain herself. I didn't want to listen to her, but I was trapped with her and forced to. She told me that he was there for her when she was grieving, and it just happened the first time. She swore that she wasn't expecting it to happen again while he was visiting. They talked about it, and they both knew it was wrong, but it just happened again. I could tell that she was lying, so I asked to see her phone. She was almost shocked that I asked. I could tell that she wasn't expecting me to fight with her about it. Reluctantly, she handed me her phone. I found the text messages between them, and it confirmed that she was lying. She apologized while I read through it all, but I knew that it wouldn't make a difference. They hooked up for the first time before her sister's funeral. She was at their house helping him look for a funeral dress for her, trying it on herself to see how it would look because they looked so similar. She told me that Joe saw her and something switched in his mind because of how much she looked like his wife. They had sex for the first time while she was trying on dresses for her sister to be buried in. From there, they developed some very strange bond where he practically pretended that my girlfriend was his dead wife. It was seriously messed up. The more she explained, the more disturbed I was with all of it. By the time we got off the elevator, Joe was catching up to us in the lobby of the apartment complex. It took everything in me not to run to him and attack him. I restrained myself and told my girlfriend that I never wanted to see her again, and strongly recommended both of them attend therapy. What they did was beyond troubling. I went to a friend's house and stayed there while I figured out what to do about my living situation. I didn't want to live in the apartment that I walked in and saw that in. While I was thinking about that, I knew I wanted to expose them. They weren't going to make a fool out of me and then continue on with their lives like nothing happened. I figured enough time had passed since her sister's death to tell everyone about how the two closest people in her life had betrayed her after she died. I threw practically her entire family into a group chat without her or Joe and composed a message explaining everything my girlfriend told me. They were outraged when I told them. Many of them didn't even believe what I said. I had people calling me and screaming, telling me I was a liar and making up horrible things. I swore to them that it was the truth. Meanwhile, my girlfriend was blowing up my phone and texting me, asking me if I told her family about her and Joe. I could see that I had accomplished everything I set out to do, so I blocked all of them. It wasn't my problem after that. A few days later, I went back to my apartment to gather my things, and I saw that Joe was still there. He looked like he wanted to kill me. He yelled at me about how he couldn't even go back to his house without worrying that my girlfriend's family was going to hurt him. I didn't care. I just packed my things and left. I haven't spoken to my girlfriend or any of her family members since then. I moved into a new apartment and have started my life over. I feel like I lost a lot of time committing myself to the wrong person, and now I have to start over. OP, I can't believe you had to go through something like that. It seems like you were being very patient with your girlfriend because of her grief. You had your gut feelings, but tried to give her the space she needed. I always think you should trust your gut when it's telling you that something is wrong. In this case, it was right. I don't understand how your girlfriend was okay with practically pretending to be her sister with her husband. The dynamic they have is very strange, and they both need a lot of counseling to work through their issues. What they did was both wrong and very unhealthy. I think that your girlfriend's family deserves to know about that. What they were doing would have upset your girlfriend's sister, and the fact that they were probably receiving a lot of pity and apologies for their loss while betraying her is sad. I know you dedicated a lot of your life to her, but I hope you are able to move on and find someone who is loyal. I wish you nothing but the best moving forward. Now, let's move on to our next story. My wife and I met through our parents 8 years ago, and we got married shortly after. We joked around and told people it was an arranged marriage because that was what it felt like. They thought we would be cute together and practically forced us on our first date. I had been too focused on my career to really focus on a serious relationship before I met her. I had a lot of meaningless flings and casual partners, but I hadn't met anyone I wanted to settle down with. When we got together, it finally clicked for me. I could see what people meant when they talked about love at first sight and just knowing when you meet the right person. We had our first child together after being married for 2 years. Everything was falling into place with us, and it felt amazing. We owned our own home, had 2 kids and a dog, and were in love. My job has always been very demanding. I have to travel a lot. When I'm not traveling, I'm working late nights at the office, and I have to take work home with me quite often. That was why casual flings worked so well for me before meeting my wife. If I was in the mood, I could just call someone, and I didn't have to worry about much else. It was more difficult to balance when I was married. I would spend long days at work and come home to my wife and the kids and still have to be on with them. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. I'll admit my sex life with my wife lacked a lot of spontaneity. When we had sex with each other, it was practically scheduled. She would tell me she wanted to, and I would tell her a day that worked for me. In hindsight, I know that it was probably unfulfilling, but it was never brought up to me. I made good money, and I took care of my wife. She didn't work, so she stayed home and took care of the kids. When they were both in school, she didn't have as much to do during the day. She would tell me about how bored she would get after the house was cleaned and how she needed to find something to fill her time. She invested in a lot of different hobbies to try during the day, but nothing stuck. She decided to join a cooking class at the local community center. She had always been a great cook, so I didn't understand why she was taking a class for it. When I asked her about it, she said it was to expand our taste buds. She was learning all kinds of new techniques and recipes, and she was really proud of her work. I was happy that she was happy, and I didn't question it anymore. She cooked some of the new recipes for us for dinner, and while we ate, she would rave about the things she learned. She would always talk about the class instructor and how brilliant he was. He was apparently very innovative and planning on opening a new restaurant in town. I had no idea anything was going on until I saw it with my own eyes. I had been at work one day when I got sick. I had been feeling bad in the morning, but I forced myself to go to work. In the middle of the day, I couldn't take it anymore and decided to go home. I was so out of it that a coworker drove me home. I didn't even think to text my wife and let her know I was on my way home. When I walked in, I could see that she had the dining room set up for a meal. It looked romantic. There were candles and wine glasses laid out. She was dressed up and in the kitchen cooking. I walked in and asked what was going on. She was very surprised to see me and tried to make it seem like she was just experimenting. I still didn't understand why there were 2 places set at the table. The doorbell rang not long after I arrived, and I answered it. A young man was on the other side, and he turned as pale as a ghost when he saw that I answered. He had a bottle of wine with him, so I assumed he was the dinner guest. My wife introduced me to him and told me that he was her cooking instructor. She tried to play it off as inviting him over to show him what he taught her. Honestly, I didn't believe it, but I was awfully sick. I was having a hard time standing upright, and I needed to collapse in bed. It was something that I needed to handle another time. It seemed fishy, but it wasn't impossible that she was telling me the truth. I went to my room and passed out in the bed. I woke up early the following morning and my wife was next to me. Part of me thought it was a dream, but I knew that it wasn't. While she was asleep, I grabbed her phone and looked through it. There were obviously a lot of deleted messages between her and the instructor, which was a major red flag. She was hiding something, and I knew that their lunch wasn't as innocent as she tried to make it seem. I looked through her image gallery and found a few hidden photos of the instructor. They were shirtless pictures mostly, but I found one picture of another man's private parts and assumed it was his. I sent what I was able to find to myself and put her phone back before she woke up. She had never given me any reason to suspect that she was cheating on me, but at that moment I started to wonder if I just missed the signs because I was too busy working. I called out of work, but I told my wife I was going in. I ended up stopping by the library to use a computer and look for a good divorce attorney. After I found one, I did some digging into the cooking instructor my wife had been seeing. I found his website online and saw that he was a minor cooking influencer online. He had a lot of followers on his social media pages and even had some sponsorships. I figured that I could ruin all of that for him. I found out who managed the community center and contacted them, informing them of the inappropriate behavior of the instructor. He seemed to be relying on the kitchen at the community center while he planned his restaurant opening. I had no doubt he was relying on that income to get it started too. When I was done there, I lingered around town until I could go home and pretend like I worked all day. I waited until I had some information from my lawyer to tell my wife that it was over. When I finally got the word, I served her with the papers and savored the shocked expression. I told her I knew about the instructor, and she tried to deny it. When she realized there was no point, she started explaining why it happened. She told me that she was feeling unfulfilled. She put all of the blame on me for not satisfying her and making her feel like she came second to my job. Like I said before, in hindsight, I can agree with that, but she never came to me and told me anything. If she had, I would have listened to her and tried to change for her. I would have gone to counseling if we needed to. I loved her, and I would have done anything to make sure our relationship was okay. But she decided what she wanted to do and sealed our fate for us. There was no going back to the way things were for me. She was disappointed and tried to sway me away from divorce, but it wasn't going to happen. We ended up divorcing, and I was favored in the end because she cheated. We still have to spend a lot of time together due to custody arrangements, and we're cordial, but I don't talk to her about anything other than the kids. OP, it sounds like you were willing to change and make sure she was happy. She might have jumped to a conclusion that you wouldn't be willing to change. It's interesting that she deleted the text messages between her and the instructor, but not the images. That seems to be what really sealed her fate there. I'm glad that you are still cordial after the divorce. I'm sure that will make things much easier on the children if you're not always fighting. But I'm sure it is very difficult for you to be around her. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.